All right. Morning, guys. Welcome. Today we're finally finishing up our series on Jonah. Each of the weeks so far, we've been going through each chapter of Jonah, and so we're finally finishing up with that and going through the fourth chapter. Just to give you guys a little recap for those who haven't gone through the rest of the book, chapter 1, we talked about the pursuit of Jonah, with the series being titled The Pursuit. Each chapter follows that line. So the first chapter is the pursuit of Jonah, and just seeing God's calling on Jonah. Jonah running away, not wanting to really be a part of what God wants to do with Nineveh. And so going through that process, and then the fish and the boat and everything. Then we see chapter 2, which is the pursuit of God. We see this long prayer that Jonah has, and we went through that process on the second week. And then finally, last week, we were hit chapter 3, which is the pursuit of Nineveh, which, in my opinion, is probably one of the biggest miracles to happen in the Old Testament. The city the size of Nineveh all coming to Christ, which is a very cool and amazing thing to happen. And that's honestly where it should end, the book of Jonah. We should have, read the last few verses right there. The entire city, comes to believe in God, and that's it. That should be it. That should be a wonderful miracle to happen. But for some reason, there's more. And not only is there more, Jonah doesn't really seem to be very happy about this whole city really coming to God. And that's something that we're going to look at today. We still have one more pursuit left, and we got to figure out what that is. So if you guys want to follow along with me, we're in chapter 4. We're just going to go through this bit by bit here. We're going to start out with the first 4 verses. It says, But to Jonah this seemed very wrong, and he became angry. He prayed to the Lord, Isn't this what I said, Lord, when I was still at home? That is what I tried to foretell by fleeing to Tarshish. I knew that you are a gracious and compassionate God, slow to anger and abounding in love, a God who relents from sending calamity. Now, Lord, take my life, for it is better for me to die than to live. But the Lord replied, Is it right for you to be angry? The first question here is, why would Jonah really be angry about all these people coming to God? Like, for a prophet, this should be an amazing feat for him. However, there are a couple of things that Jonah would most likely be upset about. First, it's, the Ninevites. And, of course, the Israelites and the Ninevites didn't really get along very well at all, really. And so when he was called by God to go to the Ninevites, it was definitely something that he didn't really want to do. One of the main reasons is this, because they hate each other. When I think of, two, big groups or nations hating each other, I think of one thing. And it's, in college football, something we call the game. Now, for those who don't watch as much college football or don't know as much about the game, it's Ohio State, the Ohio State University Buckeyes versus Michigan Wolverines. The biggest game of college football every year. I don't care about any game out of the year except this one. And it gets gnarly. It gets pretty bad. And I'm going to show you guys a clip from a game from a few years ago that kind of just shows you the magnitude of this rivalry.
Touchdown catch of the year. This one should be returnable for Dr. Wilson. 3-yard deep. And he's covered as he crosses the 15-yard line. And let's check in with Holland.
Well, his season has not gone as planned for Devin Gardner, his first time as a full-time starter.
Holland, we're going to have to interrupt you. We got a big-time battle going on right now. The officials trying to separate everybody.
Dr. Willis better go find his helmet. He's one of the freshmen, and you don't want any of this, because you don't want to lose key players.
The head coaches are out there. The assistant coaches are out there. Everybody trying to break up the melee.
Backup linebacker for Michigan. You don't want to lose anybody. Special teams guy. But now you're talking about Dr. Wilson, one of your key offensive weapons for Ohio State, that lost his composure, and a starting offensive lineman, Maurice Hall, who also is ejected.
Oh boy, that's not going to make it any better.
When I think of people who hate each other, you got to think Ohio State and Wolverines. I remember in CIY, the Christ in Youth convention that always, goes around the United States, I went to move one year, and I'm originally from Ohio. I bleed scarlet and gray. And we decided that year to go to Holland, Michigan for our CIY conference, because Holland, Michigan is honestly one of the bigger move events of the year. And every year, by the time we get to wherever we're at for the year, we always go on a Walmart run beforehand, So we get there, and I'm walking down the aisle with my roommates trying to plan accordingly because, we're all high schoolers. We're all using our parents' money, not our own. So we're sitting there grabbing the 12 packs of Mountain Dew. We're grabbing the gallon of cheese balls. We're grabbing everything we need. And I'm just getting these dirty looks from every direction. All these adults. It's everywhere. And I'm really concerned because at first I thought I'm just being a stupid teenager buying very unhealthy snacks. My cross-country coach would have killed me at the time. But quickly realized after an adult with a blue and yellow hat, the big M on it, looks at me and goes, "I'll think you're in the wrong store." It wasn't until I realized I was wearing my Ohio State University sweatshirt. It's when I realized that things didn't go right. I was invading their territory. And I think that's how Jonah probably would have felt going into Nineveh. He probably would have walked in and just immediately would have gotten dirty looks. They probably would have had nothing to do with him, nothing at all. And so every time he was walking down, he started hitting those point-to-points, going where he felt like he needed to go in the city of Nineveh. It just got nothing but dirty looks, and I guarantee you that's probably one of the main reasons why he did not want to go there. But there's one thing that Jonah forgot to plug into this whole equation. Throughout this whole story he's been going through, he forgot this one big thing, this big statement that I believe in terms of what's going on here, and that's that our God is a God of pursuing. He's a God of pursuit. And Jonah completely forgot that. As we can see so far through the rest of the story, we've seen, God pursuing Jonah, not only through the storm, but with the fish. We've seen how Jonah was pursuing God and asking for safety and for forgiveness. We've seen that. And we've seen God's constant pursuit, because the entire thing so far has been to get Jonah to Nineveh. That's what this whole story's been to. It took 3 chapters to get to it. And we're finally here, and Jonah's still upset by the whole thing. Our God is a God of pursuit, and Jonah, I think, has lost that. If we keep reading here, we read verses 5 through 9. It says, Jonah had gone out and sat down at a place east of the city. There he made himself a shelter, sat in its shade, and waited to see what would happen to the city. Then the Lord God provided a leafy plant and made it grow up over Jonah to give shade for his head and to ease his discomfort. And Jonah was very happy about the plant. But at dawn the next day, God provided a worm which chewed the plant so that it withered. When the sun rose, God provided a scorching east wind, and the sun blazed on Jonah's head so that he grew faint. He wanted to die and said, "It would be better for me to die than to live." But God said to Jonah, "Is it right for you to be angry about the plant?" "It is," he said. "I'm so angry, I wish I were dead." Jonah just doesn't get it. God is trying to pierce through Jonah right now just to see the light here. It's like, Jonah, look at all these great things that have happened so far. One of the biggest miracles of the Old Testament, an entire city. They say it takes 3 days to walk through it, even though the circumference of the wall of Nineveh is only about 7 miles. They said that to reach each major destination in the city would take about 3 days. So Jonah didn't just walk from end to end. He was kind of spiraling through the city of Nineveh bit by bit. And so as he's just walking, he's saying the same simple phrase each time. The same 5 words we read in our English Bibles over and over again for 3 days. And he just still doesn't get it. Through those simple sets of words, he just still didn't seem to understand the amazing miracle that has taken place. let alone the miracle of the fish and the storm. God just doesn't understand why Jonah just wouldn't be able to see it. God's probably was wondering why Jonah wasn't, been praised. Because through Jonah, God worked something great. It would be like for us going down to Las Vegas, walking down the main road, and just building by building, slowly and surely, converting everyone to being Christians, and how amazing that would be. Or going to Columbus, Ohio, or New York City, or wherever else you're from. I don't know. It'd be crazy. It would be amazing. Yet Jonah's still angry because he knew that God would be gracious to them, and he doesn't like the Ninevites. He just didn't seem to understand. We've seen all these miracles from Jonah. With most of the other prophets, we see a lot of the things that they talked and preached about. But with Jonah, we didn't really get all that. We really got the story of Jonah more than what he actually preached. And we see that through the miracles that we saw through chapters 1, 2, 3, and now here through 4 with the plant, trying to get Jonah to understand. Unless this book isn't really about Jonah. Now, I know it's titled Jonah. I know that this whole story has been following Jonah, but bear with me a second. What if there's a different perspective we can bring to this book? A new route and a new path that we can form and formulate a new idea regarding the book of Jonah. So if we read these final verses here, we might be able to pick something up. Verses 10 and 11. But the Lord said, "You have been concerned about this plant, though you did not tend to it or make it grow. It sprang up overnight and died overnight. And should I not have concern for the great city of Nineveh, in which there are more than 120,000 people who cannot tell their right hand from their left, and also many animals?" God's trying to get Jonah to understand that throughout this whole process, it has never been about Jonah. It hasn't been about his comfort, the people he wants to preach to. It's been about the pursuit. And I believe that through the end of this book, the pages are turning, and it's now going to be the pursuit of you. Each individual reading this has switched into the perspective of seeing Jonah and God pursuing Nineveh to now God pursuing the reader. And I think that's a big change. There's definitely two ways we can look at this. If you have been a Christian for a while, that's awesome. You get to see some of the great and amazing things God has done, not only through the church, but also through your own forms of ministry with your spiritual gifts. And I believe God is calling you with those spiritual gifts to be able to use what you have to pursue others. Just like Jonah pursued Nineveh, hopefully with a little bit more ambition. But if you haven't made that decision to become a Christian, if you haven't made the choice to follow Christ, perhaps this is the day. This is one of those signs. I don't know how you got here. I don't know what brought you to this moment. But God is pursuing you. And as you can see through Jonah, he will do almost anything within his power, which is pretty much everything, to be able to get you to follow him. He used Jonah, someone who hated the Ninevites, and converted the entire city. He can use your best friends. He can use your teachers. And for some of us, he can use you to reach the people that others can't. This is the pursuit of you. This is the pursuit of your neighbors, your students, your family. This is the pursuit. So in the end of all this, understanding how God is a God of pursuit, that we should never forget that we're constantly striving to spread the gospel, that we're constantly striving to increase the kingdom to the best of our ability. there's only a couple of questions I have for you. The first is understanding that God pursued Jonah, and then Jonah pursued God. If God right now is pursuing you, which I believe he is, are you going to pursue God? And God called Jonah to pursue Nineveh, a people he hated, a people who were far away. When Jonah left for Tarshish, if you looked at the map, that's about as far away from Nineveh as you could go. You couldn't go in any other direction without feeling closer. Who are you pursuing? Because Jonah was called to pursue someone, a group of people who he didn't particularly like. Understandably, there are definitely people in my life who I still struggle, honestly, to pursue in terms of a Christ relationship. I don't really want to give names specifically because of personal reasons. However, to fully understand that, it's hard. There was a friend from high school for a long time. We were pretty good friends, however, he was an atheist. And so when it come to pursuing him, it was definitely very hard. Mainly because anytime I brought up even Jesus, he would say how Jesus wasn't even a real person. Granted, this was mainly junior high and high school, but still, the pursuit was hard. And with people who don't really want to hear is hard. But having the faith and the backing of God is something where you can move mountains and be able to do great and amazing things. So I'll ask one more time. Are you going to pursue God? And with God, who are you pursuing? Thank you.